Hey everyone, and welcome to this Tuesday technique session with me, Jackie Blakemore of So Much More Fun. It's great to be here again. I can't believe it's Tuesday already. The week's just flown by. It's been super busy, and so I'm really excited to share this week's topic with you. So today we're going to talk about one of my favourite topics, which is how to use toiles. And this was kind of a revelation to me when I first started sewing and using them. So I didn't use these initially when I first set up with my dressmaking. I just used to make my garments in my fashion fabric. But I found that there was some downsides to that. And so we're going to talk about those today. So just while we're waiting, in case people want to join live, I'm just going to do a bit of the housekeeping. So in case you haven't seen any of these Tuesday technique sessions before, we've been running these as a series, and the idea is just to kind of build on what we've covered in the previous week. So it's always worth going back and having a watch. So you can either find the previous sessions on the Facebook page, or you can find them on the website, somuchmorefun.co.uk. And I just post those every week after I've done the live session. So you'll be able to find those there. So if you're joining me live, then feel free to ask questions. I should be able to see your comments, and I'll be able to answer any questions as they come up. Excuse me. And I want it to be interactive. So if you are here, then great. If you're not, if you're watching on the replay, then please also still do ask questions. It's really helpful to kind of see what you're thinking and what you take away from these sessions. And then it will help me tailor the techniques and stuff that we cover in the future. So if you have any ahas as well, if you kind of learn anything in the session or things that you think will be useful, or you think, you have a different technique to something that I've covered and you want to kind of share that, then again, just leave it in the comments for the Facebook session, or add that. There's a place where you can comment on the website too. So in terms of the sessions that we're going to be doing, so this week we're covering what is a toile and why do I need one. In the rest of December, we're going to be covering an introduction to common pattern adjustments. So I'm going to talk you through what order you should make your adjustments in, and the first adjustments to start with. And then on the 15th, we're going to be covering the kind of lengthening and shortening process. So if you want to make a pattern longer or shorter, I'm going to be looking at that for the different parts of the body where you're going to want to make those adjustments. On the 22nd, I'm going to be doing a session on basic shoulder adjustments. So if you have any problems with shoulders, so if you have particularly sloping shoulders or very high shoulder, or forward shoulder like I do, then we're going to be covering how to make those adjustments on the pattern. And on the 29th, then I'm going to be covering basic full and small bust adjustments. So if you're not a B cup, then, which is what most patterns are designed for, unless you buy specific patterns that are aimed at having different cup sizes, then you'll want to make some adjustments in this area to get a really nice fit and to stop it pulling or straining or being too baggy here as well. This can also impact the kind of fitting on the shoulder, because sometimes if you make the pattern so that it fits the bust, then it doesn't fit on the shoulders. So be sure to tune in for those for the rest of December. Always at 12:30, you can find me here. Okay, so on to this week's session then. So what is a toile? So have you ever used one? Those of you kind of listening or watching on the replay, have you ever used a toile? Do you know what it is? Do you ever make mock-ups of your garments before you make your finished garment? So when you make a new pattern for the first time, it can be hard to know if it's going to fit. And also whether it's going to suit you. So it's not like you can take 6 garments into the changing room like you would if you were buying clothes, try them all on and see which one looks best. And even when you're trying on ready to wear, sometimes you might pick 2 off the rail, similarly the same size, maybe in different colours, and they might even fit differently in the changing room, and you might prefer one to the other. So it can be quite hard to know until we've got something kind of made up what it's going to look like and how it's going to fit. So toile, which is I think it's a French word, And it's the name given to making a practice garment, which is using a cheaper fabric. So often you can make these using for woven patterns, not stretch patterns. You can make these up using calico, or it's sometimes referred to as muslin. And you can also just use simple bed sheets. So if you've got any old bed sheets that have maybe got marked, or you're kind of replacing, or duvet covers or anything like that, they can be ideal just for kind of helping you to make a mock-up of your garment so that you can try it on and test it out. So when I first started dressmaking, I didn't really wasn't aware of this concept, and when I first started, I was in a sewing group with some of the ladies, and we kind of talked about the pros and cons of making toiles, because I was only really introduced to it when I started doing pattern drafting. Because there definitely, you want to try out your garment before you make it up. There's so much going on when you're drafting your own pattern that you want to be sure that you're going to be able to get a good fit, and that you've made everything is going to kind of go to plan. So I learned about it then, but then realized that actually I should have been doing it for all the patterns that I'd been making prior to that. But when I was chatting to some ladies about it, and they were saying, oh no, it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money, why would you bother? Just go straight to your, just make up your garment. If you're going to take all that time to make it, then why not make it as the finished garment? That's what you want to wear. So I just want to kind of address some of those things. And I just wonder, have you ever made something that you didn't end up wearing? Did you make it straight from the pattern and then tried it on and thought, actually, I'm not sure I really like it? Or have you ever made anything and then struggled to get it to fit? There are some adjustments that you can make in your garment when you're trying it on. After you've made it up in your fashion fabric, particularly if you make kind of big seam allowances, you can make some adjustments. You can't always fix everything in that version. Or if you ever wished that you'd chosen a different pattern variation, if you've got different options on the pattern for maybe different sleeve types or different necklines or collars or things like that, have you kind of you've chosen one to make it and then actually thought, actually, this isn't the one I like, I wish I'd made the longer sleeved one or the shorter sleeved one or whatever. Or have you ever tried to tackle a new technique as part of a project? Have you ever picked up a pattern and it's got you to do things that you haven't done before, and you've maybe not got that right first time and ended up having to unpick your lovely fabric, and sometimes that leaves marks and it can kind of leave an impression on the fabric which you can't always get out. So these are all some of the reasons that I think making a toile is so beneficial. I think it counteracts all the arguments about wasting time or wasting money, because if you've spent a lot of money on fabric and you want to make a really lovely garment, and you're going to kind of end up in a situation where perhaps it's not going to fit quite right, or perhaps that style's not going to suit you, then to me that's a bigger waste of time and money. So I would always say, making a toile is a great investment of your time and should be relatively little money. If you can buy calico for kind of around about £3 a metre. In fact, I get mine from IKEA, do something called Bomul, and it's about £2.25 a metre, and it's quite lightweight. So it's not as heavy as some of the traditional calicos, but for me, it's perfectly fine. I live quite near IKEA, so it's really handy. I don't have to pay for shipping. But there's quite a lot of websites now offering, particularly if you're buying in bulk, good deals on buying calico. So it should be quite cost effective as an alternative. For say £4 for 2 meters, £4 or £5, then I definitely think it's worth giving that a go. So what are the other benefits of making a toile? So I would say that firstly, it gives you a chance to practice. You get to practice your whole garment, you get to practice that whole pattern, all the different techniques, without any fear of getting it wrong, because worst cases you have to unpick it, and calico is fairly hard wearing, so it unpicks quite easily, and especially because you'll be able to sew it. You're making a mock-up, so you'd be able to sew it in a thread that you can really see. So whenever I'm making my toiles, I tend to use kind of a dark thread or a red thread that I can really see against the colour of the calico. That makes it really easy to unpick if I need to unpick it or change it. And it just means it's really straightforward. So that's one reason. I think also when you first start dressmaking, it can be quite scary to cut out your fashion fabric. You've paid all this money and you don't want to get it wrong. And I know lots of people who, when they first start, have a real fear of cutting things out, and they end up with a big fabric stash and a big pile of patterns, and they never actually make anything because it's too scary. And I've been there and done that. I've bought fabric and thought, actually, I don't want to make a mistake, so I don't cut it out. Hi, Leslie. So it's really lovely to be able to get rid of that fear and to overcome kind of cutting out the fabric, because if you're only spending a couple of pounds, £3 on the fabric itself, then you're kind of more willing to experiment and more excited about kind of giving it a go, and less worried about getting it wrong. And that's the whole kind of point of this, is to be able to experiment and try, and kind of work out what's going to be the best way to create this garment. It also allows you to check the style and the fit before you finish the version. So when I first started this, I was planning to make, the first toile I ever made was for a coat. And I was learning pattern drafting, and one of the projects that we were given was to make a winter coat. So I bought a pattern that I thought was lovely. It was a Project Runway pattern with a stand-up collar, and it kind of fell away at the centre. Beautiful, beautiful pattern. And I made the toile up, and I actually did a full make on the toile, so I could kind of see what all the techniques were to make it. And it was, I thought it looked amazing, and I put it on and I looked like an Oompa Loompa. So I definitely didn't make the jacket. And the reason why that was important to me was I was about to spend, to make coats, you want to buy decent quality fabric, and that fabric's kind of, you're talking about 20 quid a meter or that kind of cost. So I could have spent £40 to make a coat that I would never have worn. So it was entirely worth the process and the time to make that and try it out. So I think that's, one of the benefits is that you can't necessarily take your garment into a changing room, but this is kind of like the best alternative in my view. You can use it, you're making it in a plain fabric, so you can get a sense of the style and the drape and how it's going to look and what might work best in terms of the patterns that you're going to use in your final fabric. And you can also mark it up without having any distractions from, patterns or colours. You can make some of the adjustments that you might require for fit that you couldn't make on a finished garment. So sometimes when I'm fitting, and you'll see in some of the examples I've got for you today, I actually slash the fabric to work out where I need the extra fabric. If something's too tight or not quite hanging right, then it can be quite useful to be able to cut the fabric in the middle and kind of work out how you're going to make your pattern adjustment. So this is particularly true for me at the back. So I'm quite wide, kind of across my back hip, usually wider than the pattern. And so it helps me to kind of work out where I need to add extra fabric. And being able to slash the fabrics, which you definitely wouldn't want to do in your fashion fabric, is a real benefit and a bonus to be able to do that. And also, like we said earlier, it's quite hard wearing, so it's fairly forgiving in terms of you can unpick it and re-sew it quite a few times before it kind of gives way. And equally, it's not that expensive. So if you need to recut a particular piece, then you can do that and slot it in, and it's going to be relatively low cost. So I definitely think it's worth the effort of making the garment. And also, we've talked about this in previous sessions. The first version that you do of anything is never going to be your best. It's rare that you will do something the first time and it's better than it's going to be the best you'll ever do. So I think there's a benefit to retrying the process and giving it a go in your toile, and then when you come to do it in your final version, then you're less scared. You know what's coming, you know what to expect. You will kind of ironed out some of the kinks, and it just gives you more confidence when you go into your final project. Okay, so what are the differences between making your toile up and making your finished garment? It's not actually going to take you necessarily as long to make the toile as it would to make the finished garment, because we're not going to sew everything unless you choose to. You don't need to sew all of the aspects of the garment. You can do that to practice the different elements, but it's not necessary. But the bit that you will allow a bit more time for is kind of modifying it, maybe redoing it, maybe changing some of the seams. So there's kind of a trade-off between what you'll do in fitting adjustments versus what you'll do in the finishing of the garment. And so when I'm making a toile, I'll tend to mark it up. So we're going to see some examples of that in a second. I'll put a lot more lines on it. I'll put a lot more indicators on it so that I can assess it when I'm wearing it and when I've tried that on. And you can do that because you're going to be able to see that on the right side of the fabric, and you'll want to see that when you're trying it on. Also, when I'm sewing it, I tend to sew with a longer stitch length. So I tend to sew with maybe a 3.5 or 4 stitch length, so that what I would call a machine basting stitch, so that when you come, if you want to unpick it or take something out and retry it, then it's much easier to undo those seams. You can quickly unpick them, and they come out much easier when you're trying to make your modifications. So dial up the stitch length a bit. Give yourself a bit of leeway, and then that's going to help you when you come to make your adjustments. I'll tend to just focus on sewing the main construction seams. So I'll sew things like the shoulder and side seams, any kind of I'll mark out where the front finishing lines are. So say it's a shirt, I might mark the stitch lines of where the centre front is, where it's going to join, but I may not put all the facings on. I'll put a sleeve in maybe, or a couple of sleeves, but I probably won't hem them. So you kind of leave out some of those finishing things, and you'll kind of just do the construction and fitting type aspects of the sewing. So you'll put your darts in and those bits, but you won't necessarily, you may not even add the collar. You know, you might decide that you can tell whether it fits well enough just by making the top, or without kind of any of those finishing. I also tend to leave zips out, and I might move where the opening is so that it's easier for me to pin when I'm fitting it on myself. So, for example, if I've got a dress with a back zip, I might sew the whole back seam up and then just leave myself an opening under the arm so I can just get it on and try it out, because it's easier to pin here under the arm and kind of bring those seams together than it is for me to try and pin all the way down the back and get that to fit nicely. So in my finished garment, I will obviously put the zip in the back, but when I'm making the toile up, because I'm not going to put a zip in it, I just need to be able to get it on and be able to pin it. Then I might move the opening kind of as I'm doing the construction, so I can check that if the zip was closed and I had a zip in it, this is what it would look like at the back. And sometimes it can give you a better, because a zip can also distort the back of the garment as well, like if you're trying to do fitting. So it's sometimes easier to pin without the zip in if you're making changes to the back. I do a lot of back changes. I've got a very funny shaped back compared to the patterns. So for me, that's kind of quite a common theme, really. Yeah, so you don't have to do all of the finishing aspects. You can just do what you need to be able to get the fitting information that you need. That's the primary reason for doing a toile, is to get a good fit. Okay. So how are you going to get the best use out of it? Well, one of the best tips that I saw, and I can't remember the lady's name, but she does a fitting technique where she basically fits by a grid across your whole body. But one of the things that I loved was that she talked about marking on your toile horizontal and vertical balance lines, which I think are super, super helpful. And I'm going to show you an example that I did with some trousers that really show how this works. And the idea is that before you sew your toile up, with it laid out flat, you mark some horizontal lines, you draw them on, and you can stitch them like, you know, kind of with a basting stitch, to make it clearer from the right and the wrong side. But you would draw the line vertically and horizontally. So you maybe draw a line here, kind of just above the bust. You might draw a line at the tummy. You might mark where the waist is supposed to be on the toile, so you can see whether it matches where your waist is. Do the same on the back, and then vertical lines as well, particularly trying to go over the bust so you can check whether that's hanging straight. Equally on skirts, it's super helpful. So lines down the front of the skirt, lines down the back over your bottom, and a line across where your sort of hip line is, and then maybe a little bit below the bottom or across the bottom. And the idea of that is that when you then put the garment on, it should, if it's fitting well, the lines should all be horizontal and vertical. But what tends to happen is if the garment doesn't fit well, so let's say, for example, it's a bit tight across the chest, then what will happen is instead of being horizontal, the line will actually curve and you'll be able to see the curve, maybe not as pronounced as that, but you'll see it's bowing away from the straight. And what that tells you is there's not quite enough fabric. So this is kind of rising up at the top and then it's dipping down at the side. So you need a bit more fabric here to make this level. And then that kind of leads you into this slashing method that I mentioned earlier, where by adding extra length in the center here, that can drop down the bust point if that's where the problem is. So you can start to then kind of do your detective work to see actually it's too short in the front, or it's too long in the shoulder, or whatever it might be that's causing the problem. So these guidelines really help you understand how it's fitting and where exactly to make those changes. And then also what you can do is after you've got your garment on, because you're going to have made it in a light coloured fabric, you can actually draw on. So you can pin out the excesses, or if there's any extra fabric, you can pin that, and then you can kind of draw the lines on. Or you can draw, for example, kind of where you want your shoulder point to go, because sometimes the shoulder's too long, and you actually want to bring that up. So you might draw on just using a Sharpie or something like that. You can kind of actually draw on the toile. Then you can take it off and resew it. And once you've kind of finalized it, you've got the markings then that you can then use to transfer back to your pattern. So you can measure those different changes and then transfer them back to your pattern pieces once you've worked out exactly what you want to do. So this is an example. I was checking earlier. I've just I must have a mountain of muslin under my desk here, because I have loads of toiles. I like to try patterns out, and that's kind of my thing. So I have like a little museum of toiles under my desk. But one of the ones I just wanted to show you was a pattern piece from some trousers that I was trying to make, and you'll see on here that I've marked on. Can you see the horizontal and vertical balance points here? So I actually sewed these in so that I could try it on inside out as well, because I wanted to pin some of the seams. And this is what I mean by kind of marking the lines. Now you can see this is the kind of the two back pieces and the zip. I did put a zip in this case because it's quite hard fitting trousers. And you can also see where I've slashed it to see if adding width across my bum would make any difference. And so when I put them on, so I'll show you that in the photos that I'm going to show you now. Okay, so let's have a look at some examples then. So if I just find a way to share my screen, let's just bring this up. So I thought it might be useful to see some real examples of toiles that I've used and made, and I'm just going to point out some fitting issues that I would then use to adjust the pattern. So if I just do share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you can see this. We can zoom in if we need to. I wonder if I can just do, let's just try doing it as a, oh no, that doesn't work. I can't see anything. Right, so what we're going to do is just have a look at these. So this is the example of the trousers that I mentioned. And in here, what we can see is, hopefully, if I just zoom that in a little bit. So you can see I've got the toile on. I haven't added the waistband in this case, although I would recommend doing that if you're, if you're starting to make trousers. But you can see I've marked on, these are the stitch lines that I put in for the horizontal and vertical balances, and I've just kind of put them at places where I think I might have a problem with my fitting. And so from the front, it doesn't look too bad, but can you see across the thigh here, it's kind of bowing out slightly, and this is what I was talking about earlier. What you really want to see there is that that's hanging straight. And part of the reason for this is, as we'll see when we come to the side view, there's not enough fabric round this side and round the bottom, so it's kind of pulling round to the back. And so that starts to give me a clue that whilst at the front it's probably okay, and there's not too much, there's a little bit of creasing around the crotch here, but it's not too bad. But can you see also it's not hanging straight, and it's kind of it's going from the center towards the outside. So it's sort of rolling round to the kind of outside. And what we'd really want is that this to be hanging straight down. If we look at it from the side view as well, we can see the similar thing. So can you see these sort of drag lines that are coming up to the thigh, which sort of indicate there's not enough fabric around this area. So it's sort of pulling here. And you can see it again, the side seam, it's sort of dipping here. So I might want to sort of add some fullness, but equally I'm probably going to have to shorten this out seam as well on this particular toile. From the back view, it's not too bad actually, although you can see it's a bit tight in the bum, which again, you'll see why I kind of cut those open on the example. So you can see that again, there's some drag lines, but I think more of that is actually coming from the fact there's just not enough room in the hip. And so adding some extra kind of at the hip will start to give some extra room for the thigh at the front, and it will stop trying to kind of pull it from the back to give to the front, which is what's happening kind of in this example. But you can see the back's hanging much straighter, so this isn't too bad. But there is a slight, you can't really tell from this angle of the photograph actually. I don't think it's too bad. It looks worse than it is in this example, but I think that, you know, again, these horizontal lines at the back, you want those to be level. If they're dipping down, then it might indicate you want to make some adjustment to kind of shorten in this area just under the bum. And that could be to do with kind of the crotch and those kind of things. So I just wanted to show you this example because it's got the markings on, and this was the one that I thought would be really helpful. But I also want to show you some others of tops and things. Now, I haven't marked these ones up, but I just wanted to point some things out. So excuse my happy face. I am always really happy in these photos. This is just my concentrating face, I would have to say. So this was a wrap top that I was trying to fit. And these pictures are a bit bright, so it's a bit hard to see some of the details. But you can see that I've marked the centre front with tailor's tacks here. And I've probably got this pulled a bit far across, if I'm honest, in wearing this. But actually, across the front, it's not too bad. I maybe want to kind of narrow the shoulder a little bit on this one. It's maybe a bit wide across the front. But where it's really not fitting, you can see in this back view, is that you've got this kind of bulge at the back. And again, this sort of extra fabric at the back in this middle view from the side. Now, the side seam's actually hanging relatively straight. So that's the other thing that I'm going to be looking for. But for some reason, there's just not enough to go over my hips here. And you can see as well, it's sort of bunching up. Now, one option is to kind of try and shorten this back piece. But I think actually the first problem is that there's not enough room kind of in this bottom back section. And that's quite common for me. I sort of carry a bit of saddlebag type weight on my back hip. And that this is quite a common adjustment for me to have to make. You can also see here that it's quite wide across the cross back. So again, I would probably take a bit out of the armhole on these examples because I'm getting, you know, a bit of bagginess kind of in that back section as well. So I did make some changes on this pattern, and you can see that I've tweaked the armhole slightly. So this is the original one. And then this was me sort of after I shortened it a little bit. I shortened that back by about, I think, about ½ inch. And then so this is fitting better here. But then I realized it still was pulling. So I opened out, I just cut the center back here. Now, on reflection, this is not the best place to cut it, because what you really want to do is try and keep the center back on the grain of the fabric. So you want to sort of keep that intact if you can. So what I should have done is cut probably more down these side points here and left this back piece. So that would have opened out. And when I made the final adjustment, that was kind of how I made the adjustment, to be honest. But it just gave me a sense of how much extra I needed in this back piece. And can you see now it's opened out? This hangs a lot better in this kind of center back area. And so after making those adjustments, you can see now this back piece hangs a lot flatter. And you can see how much it's sort of raised up in that back, but it kind of just sits into the dent of my back there. So the next one I just wanted to show you was this pattern, which has kind of got a princess seam. Now, in this case, when I made the first one, it was too wide across the front. So I took out some from this center front line, and actually I've taken out too much here. So you can just start to see a bit of pulling here at the center front. But everywhere else, it kind of fits quite nicely across the chest. And this is another example where I think this did have a side seam in, so I've just pinned the side here. But you can see again, I've got a similar slight problem at the back here, and you can also see at the side, from the side view, again, these pulls towards the bust are kind of indicating that there's not enough fabric to go over the bust, so it's kind of just pulling here. And the back's actually not fitting too badly, but there's a kind of few wrinkles going on here. So, and I've not really pinned the hem very well, so you can see that's a bit wonky. So don't judge me. But you can start to see as well, again, this one's a little bit wide across the back. So again, I might take out some on that cross back here. So even though these are really rough photos, I literally just kind of propped my phone up, triggered the photos. It just give you a really good insight, because when you're trying to look over your shoulder or into a mirror or whatever, it's really difficult. And so the last one I wanted to show you is another top. So if you've listened to the podcast this weekend, these are the tops that I was referring to that I didn't really want to change because I've been putting it off. But I have just taken them apart. They're sitting here on my desk now in pieces. But I just want to show you this one as well. So in this one, the band here is probably a bit long for me, if I'm honest, in terms of my proportions. And so I think it's sort of it's creating too much here, so I'm probably going to shorten the depth of this band, and I think that will sit a bit better on the front. But overall, it's not too bad. There's something weird going on here, and I might take something out of the armhole at the front. I think this is too wide across my chest here, and then that's making this bag out under the arm. But it's definitely way too wide across the back. I think when I measured my cross back, I think I'm about 14.5 inches, and I think the pattern's about 16. So you can see here it's way past my arm, and then you're also then getting all these kind of extra drag lines here. Oh, we've got the extra fabric, and again, I've got too much length in the back. But I think if I halve the depth of the waistband, then I think that's going to give me a bit more room. I might still take a little bit off the length so that the top of the waistband sits a little bit higher. But I really like the back fitting of this skirt part. I haven't made any adjustments to this part. It's got a bit more room in it. It's just designed to be more peplumy, and so I probably wouldn't need to make any adjustments here. But I think just kind of shortening the depth of this would work a lot better, and changing the back. So I'm going to kind of make those kind of adjustments. So can you see, just from making these samples, I've got some really helpful fitting information, and they didn't really take me very long to cut out and to make up. And they're really going to benefit me when I come to do my final version. So I've taken those garments apart and it was really quick to do. So I was just sitting in front of the TV, and I've just taken the bottom part off the last one that I showed you, and I'm going to shorten that waistband, and then I'm going to resew it. And so they're going to quick fixes really, just to give it a try and to get a really nice fit. And you could see from the one where I had made the adjustment, changing the fit of that back really makes a difference. And I've reused that pattern now, that kind of back pattern, as a template for other things and for some alterations and things as well. So getting a good fit, sort of really sets you up. And I could use that again against these patterns and just double check the proportions and so on as well. So that's my kind of selling point for why you should make toiles. And I hope you found that really useful. So if you've tried them, then I'd love to know how you get on. If you haven't tried them, then are you going to give it a go? Have I convinced you to give it a try? And I just kind of keep all my old bed sheets. And my mum's watching now, so she'll tell you as well. She's having to buy new bed sheets because she keeps using all of hers up for making toiles and samples and different things. So go steady. That's all I'll say. Don't use everything. You still need something to put on the bed. But yeah, I'd love to know kind of what you make and how you get on. And definitely that marking up method, we're going to use that a bit more as we go through some of the fitting adjustments. I'm going to kind of encourage you to try that out, and I'll do some more samples and share them with you. So you can really see the fit changes and how and where you want to make those adjustments. So have you got any patterns that you can use this on? What's in your stash, what's in your pile that you want to make up? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what your kind of next projects are, and send me some photos. I'd love to see how you're getting on. And if you want any help, if you kind of want to take some photos and send them over to me, I'm more than happy to take a look and give you some guidance as to kind of adjustments to make. And to get started on that leads me nicely into next week's session, which will be, you know, what order we're going to make the adjustments in, and how to start making those adjustments on your patterns and on your toiles. So I hope you can join me. It'll be 12:30 on Tuesday, and I look forward to seeing you then. That's everything from me, and take care and bye for now.